Well, it's actually one of the slides that I left off here. I believe that all of our relations between the South and the Negro, the civil rights issue, all of it would have been moderated if Lincoln would have lived to oversee Reconstruction. I think Lincoln would have brought the Southern leaders who had already seceded. I think he would have brought them back into government earlier. He said he would. He said he didn't want any trials of the Southern leaders. And there's a great quote when he said, "Just let the rebels go home. We've made enough sacrifices. We must extinguish our resentments if we expect unity." So I think it would have been a totally different world if he would have lived.
Okay, regarding the debates that are now taking place for the presidential primaries and then hopefully for the presidential election, in your research, Lincoln debated a number of times with Douglas. What do you think the best debate was that they had?
Well, I don't know. First of all, these weren't really debates. The way the Lincoln-Douglas dialogue went, they did seven cities in Illinois, from north all the way down south. In fact, you may not know, but Jonesboro, where they had one debate, is actually further south than Richmond, Virginia. So Southern Illinois was really a Southern sympathizing area. But the way these commentaries work is the first speaker, and they drew by line. The first speaker had an hour and a half to speak. That's not unusual. Stevens one time gave a 9-hour talk. But they had an hour and a half to speak. The other speaker then had a 1-hour rebuttal time. And then the first speaker had 30 minutes to give his talk. Now, these two men did sometimes banter back and forth on stage. Usually, Lincoln with a sense of humor and Douglas very serious with all of his comments. One comment Lincoln made about Douglas at the time is that man can use the most words to express the smallest ideas of anybody I ever knew. I hope that helped. It wasn't a debate, and I don't know that one was any more important, because as they went through, what began to happen is Lincoln focused more and more on his anti-slavery views, and his arguments against both the Missouri Compromise and the Kansas Nebraska Act, which expanded slavery. And he didn't focus a lot on national issues, but they looked to me were totally different in national issues too. Yes?
Gary, I had heard that the Civil War, of course, was probably a couple years into the war, Lincoln had negotiated with the Southern contingent ending the war. And this was something he did. He denied that the Democrats were constantly after him that he was trying to negotiate the war. What is your sense on that? Did you hear that story? Or is
Well, no, the story is absolutely true. In late February and early March, Alexander Stephens, who was vice president of the Confederacy, and Lincoln knew each other. And there was an approachment made that the two of them meet, along with Secretary of State Seward for the Union. They didn't know who would be coming from the Confederacy. The issue with Congress was that originally they were going to go up into Washington, D.C. and peace Congress. Lincoln had a change of heart. And Lincoln would not allow them to come any further than the southern coast of Maryland and not come up the river into Washington. Now, there were rumors about that there was a peace conference, and Lincoln wasn't paying any attention to the peace overtures. But remember, this was only about 3 months before the war ended, and only a month before Lincoln was assassinated. So what Lincoln did is he said, I won't let them come into Washington. So we had them stop, and they put them on the green, as you've seen the Lincoln movie, that's what they said. But what Lincoln did was he wanted them to go to Congress and say, as far as I know, there are no Confederate Peace Conference attendees in the state or in this Washington, D.C., or likely to be in it. So he told the truth, but as William Seward said later, it wasn't the whole truth. There was a peace conference, they did meet, they did not settle anything because Stephens could only offer a ceasefire under instructions from Jefferson Davis. He could only offer a ceasefire between their two countries. Lincoln would have no language, written or spoken, and talk about two countries. He felt the country beyond the seceded states would sooner or later come back in. So it broke apart. There's a great story there, though, about Lincoln believing that you always want to leave an entree. When the meeting broke up, the two men shook hands, and Lincoln inquired about Alexander Stephens' family. And he said, all good, Mr. President, except my nephew is a prisoner of war in the Union prison. Lincoln found the nephew, released him back to his family of Alexander Stephens as a gesture of friendship after that meeting. But it resolved nothing about the war. The war was only resolved when the Confederates just didn't have enough men and ammunition to keep fighting. It didn't go on. Actually, there was a naval battle in August of that year, months after Lee's surrender. So it didn't just end with Lee's surrender. Yes.
Oh, Gary, thanks for your discussion. I was fascinated watching the HBO show on Washington and his presence in the beginning of the nation, John Adams. John Adams was excluded from his cabinet and wouldn't even be able to be part of his policy-making team. Did Lincoln have the same rule, or when did that change when the vice president started becoming part of his team and the cabinet meeting?
Well, his first vice president was part of his team, but he considered the vice president's role, Lincoln talked about, he considered the vice Hamlin's role to be to preside over the Senate. In those days, Senate was a pretty raucous place. I mean, you may have heard the story where one congressman went on the floor of the Senate and beat another senator over the head with a cane. I mean, it wasn't a civil, I think it's uncivil today, but it wasn't civil at all. So that was a big job. But Lincoln did include all of his cabinet members at all cabinet meetings, whether it was postmaster or interior, but he really relied on two.
Can't hear you.
Sorry, he really relied on two, William Seward and Edward Stanton. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gary. Sorry we had a short time.